As we come on the air tonight, we have breaking updates on several of the major wildfires burning in our state.
First, the East Troublesome Fire in Grand County. The area where the fire is burning is now under a red flag warning. Wind gusts will hit 35 miles an hour at times. Now, officials are planning an update at 5:30. Forest Service land.
When we started the dream vision of Harbor Ministries, there was a real strategic nature to Estes Park. I knew that I wanted to invite people into a remote area. So I actually started driving around the town of Estes Park and just looking for, okay, what would be the right kind of place, the right kind of spot. Saw this big house on the river, and I go, I wonder about that place, and they had a for sale sign in the yard. We rented that place for several years. The whole time that for sale sign stayed up there, they never sold it, and we started to dream and wonder if we could actually own this place. So we raised about $500,000 and put that as a deposit in the bank, and we were able to buy that in early 2019. But the dream and hope was that we wouldn't straddle the ministry with debt. We went into January of 2020 with about $1.2 million still in debt. As we proceeded through that year and wondered if Harbor was going to make it, let alone the fact that we now had $1.2 million in debt. But as the months went on and we got into the summer, there started to see some signs of life for people again, and things started to kind of move. And one of the first things we did in the fall of 2020 was there was a group of pastors and business leaders that were really hurting, like many people. We invited several to come, and we were all going to meet in Estes Park and meet at the Blue Spruce and spend a couple days together. So I remember Brian Olson and I jumping in the car and heading toward Colorado. We knew at the time there was a lot of wildfires in Colorado. We literally drove under a dark cloud for about the last 3 hours of the drive heading into Colorado. It was kind of this ominous sign.
We always go to the Rock Cut Brewery and have a beer, but this time, we take a sip of beer and just have to then kind of put our glass under the picnic table because ash was falling from the sky. It was just kind of snowing ash.
This video was taken overnight, and no, that's not snow, it's raining ash. And that ash likely came from the East Troublesome Fire being blown into different parts of the state because of the high winds. The good news is more evacuations were lifted today in Larimer County.
The forecasts were that winds were blowing, the ash into the area, but there wasn't a threat, and no one in town seemed really worried that night. The next morning, all the guys had gotten in, and we decided to go for a short hike. It was midday, but the skies were darkish red.
Growing more than 150,000 acres in less than 24 hours. The East Troublesome Fire, now the second largest on record.
That is the East Troublesome Fire, just 5 miles away from this beautiful town.
I had my phone with me, and you get this alert about a potential evacuation. I'm like, guys, this looks pretty serious here. And then wasn't too much longer after that, there was a mandatory evacuation, so we were hightailing it back to the Spruce.
As we approached the Blue Spruce, got to the cabin, we saw a neighbor throwing stuff in their car and kind of a hurried, panicked way, and I could hear a microphone going, "Don't grab your personal things, get in your cars and leave." So it was that kind of urgency that all of a sudden hit, and that's literally all in about 10 or 15 minutes. And so I walked through the Blue Spruce house, kind of said my goodbyes because I did think that was it, and also was realizing we were still, $1 million in debt to the house, and I felt very defeated at the time of that I had made some kind of reckless decision to expose Harbor Ministry financially to this risk, and knowing this place could be a total loss, and how would we ever find the resource, to make up for that. We got in our cars, and there was this very slow exodus out of town because everybody was evacuating. And as we emerged to the eastern edge of town and going so slow, and I looked over at the river, and there was this guy fly fishing in the river in the midst of this chaos, in the midst of this panic and fear and everything that was going on. Calm as could be. One of my first thoughts in that time was whatever he's got, I want. Because in the midst of everything that was going on around him, didn't look panicked, looked unchanged. This strong impression came to me, that's what you started Harbor for. That was the vision God gave me in the first place. That leaders could come into a place, no matter what's going on around them, what disruptions, what chaos, what struggle, that they could come into a place and find peace in the midst of the storm.
Crews say they are making progress and have been able to slow the fire's progression.
They also got some help from a well-timed winter storm.
I do want to reiterate, at this hour, Estes Park is doing just fine.
Once the fire was halted and we realized we didn't lose the blue spruce, that became a catalyst for what we were trying to do and fundraising for the blue spruce for the rest of 2020. And on December 31st, literally, I and a friend of mine took the last check into the bank and paid off the blue spruce and became debt-free in 2020. And that's a moment I will never forget, none of us will. That image of the fly fish in the midst of the crisis of that fire gave me a visual for what Harbor would be, but also what my next stage and season of life and leadership would be. There was a couple powerful images. One was, is that guy crazy to be fishing in the midst of that going when he should be evacuating like everybody else? There was an absolute wild side to that part of it. But at the same time, there was a moment of him being in that water, in that stream, in the midst of chaos, and staying with that to stay wild. And so I began to journal around those words. What does it mean for a leader to stay when others around him are shaken? And then what's it mean to be wild in a radical pursuit of God in the midst of everything else that's going on around us?
You can unpack those two words in so many ways. Because when you say them together, stay wild, it just thinks like, yeah, be a wild person all the time. But it's like, no, in the context of Harbor, there's the stay side. Sometimes staying is a very wild thing to do. It's wild because it might go against culture, it might go against advice. It doesn't make a lot of sense to heavily invest in 20 at a time, believing and knowing that the ripple effects from investing in those leaders is going to change the world and reach way more people than just the 20 there.
We believe that the world desperately needs people that can stay foundational and steady in the midst of disruption around them, but also are men and women who are willing to step out. We're not always promised safety, we're not always promised a guaranteed outcome. What we are invited to do is follow God into a mysterious, wild pursuit.
Stay wild. It's always what we've been about, even before we had those words.